Hello and welcome to Just a Moment. My name is Kristen Harding. Welcome to the show. Today we're continuing our little journey with the Baron Trump novels, and it's called The Baron Trump Novels and the Last President by Ingersoll Lockwood, and it was written, believe, in 1899. And again, I'm reading this book because many of my friends have asked if I knew anything about it. And I thought it would be a lot of fun to just read it together. And so far, we have encountered is we've encountered tales of the armless knight, and we have encountered the tale of how he sailed to his new adventure. And now, at where we left off, he had encountered some very unusual people, in that those people, they appeared almost skeletal, and they had like almost sacks attached to them, and he couldn't figure out what that was all about until it got stormy and the wind started blowing, and we found out that those people are actually called the wind eaters. So that's where we left off, with the wind eaters. So I'm just going to pop over here to the comments and it will show me if we have anybody. Oh, we do have a couple of people. Welcome. And as we begin, again, I'm going to just go a little bit behind where we left off. And it says, when the air is calm and the winds asleep, these curious people are obliged to fast, and their skin hangs in wrinkled bags as I have described. But when the wind starts up for a mad frolic or even a gentle puff and blow, these strange creatures at once begin to increase in size, and not long is it before every wrinkle and crease disappear like magic. So that's about where we left off, and we are technically only on page 37. This is, I have to say, a little bit of a challenge to read because the language is so very descriptive, and some of it is a little archaic. But if you've got any questions, I will answer them as best I can. So let's get to it. As Go Wiz and his companions stood before me, I was struck by the ridiculous contrast between their voices and the expressions on their faces. Yesterday, with their fierce and forbidding faces, their voices were soft and flute-like. Today their voices were terrible, deep and rumbling, while their faces, now puffed out smooth and round, seemed wreathed in smiles and good humor. As I stood lost in wonder at the sight of these strangely transformed beings, Go-Wiz rumbled out something which I easily understood to be a request that I should permit him to conduct me to the residence of his great chief, Zitwish Zitwish. I smiled assent and set up about gathering my traps. Bulger was completely nonplussed and fixed his lustrous eyes upon me and said, "Dear little master, how canst thou trust thyself to these huge mountains of flesh, a single one of whom could crush thy frail body as easily as I would a mouse?" I gave him a few caresses and stroked his silken coat to let him know that I was sure that I was right. Go-Wiz and his band, clumsy as they seemed, were by no means slow of pace. They moved forward at a brisk rate, for the air was calm, and they had little to carry. Now and then, upon bumping together, they bounded apart like rubber balls. It was a difficult thing for me to keep from laughing, especially when I saw Bulger's look of utter perplexity. He rolled his eyes up at me in the most comical manner. However, at last we entered the village of the Wind Eaters, where the great chief Zitwish Zitwish held his court. He too was puffed out pretty round, although, as I afterward learned, the laws of the land did not allow him to eat as heartily as his subjects. Here and there a wrinkle is visible. His face and arms didn't have that look of puffy tightness common to his people after a hearty meal. He had already been fully informed of my arrival on his island and of my extraordinary weight and hardness for my size. It took about 15 of the wind eaters to balance me in the scales. Chief Zitwish Zitwish received Bulger and me with the greatest kindness. I was at once presented to his ministers of state and to the members of his family. Queen Fuyu was a very stately dame, dignified and reserved in her manners, but the little Princess Pufa charmed me with her childlike curiosity. Curiosity. There we go. Their Excellencies, the ministers of state, stood behind their master and seemed intent upon giving him far more advice than he was willing to listen to. Their names were Hissa, Wur, and Shaboom. You may well imagine the excitement created in the home of Zitwish by my arrival. From the highest to the lowest, from chief to serving man, everyone begged and implored to be allowed to touch me. Anxious to make a favorable impression upon the strange people so that I might have a good opportunity to study them at my ease, I submitted good naturedly for an hour or more to being patted, pinched, prodded, rubbed, and stroked. It were vain for me to attempt to give you any idea of the 1,001 outcries of surprise, delight, wonder, fear, anxiety, and dread which went up from this multitude of strange beings, who were, although they didn't seem to think so, quite as great curiosities to me as I to them. My stock of dried fruit was now quite exhausted, and I began to feel the gnawings of hunger. I was always blessed with a splendid appetite, and the pure, bracing air of this island only added to it. Bulger, too, I could see, was casting inquiring glances about in search of some sign of kitchen arrangements. I made known to Chief Zitwish as well as I could the state of affairs, and he at once summoned Hissa, Wurwur, and Shaboom to his side for a consultation. They held a most animated discussion, and one, too, which ran from quarter hour to quarter hour without any sign of coming to an end. All this time my poor stomach was wondering what had cut off the customary supplies. Like rulers the world over, Chief Zitwish was impatient and self-willed. Finally he lost his temper completely and moved about so vigorously that his 3 ministers were kept continually on the bounce, so to speak. If you can only wait long enough, everything comes to an end, and I was finally bidden to approach the chief, who asked me whether I had since my arrival on his island seen anything which I could eat. I was obliged to confess that I had not, whereupon there was another consultation, which ended in Zitwish seizing his club and sending each one of his ministers in a different direction with 3 quick, smart blows. The sight was so ludicrous that I would have willingly have let my dinner go for a chance at that bat myself. Suddenly an idea came to me. I could see that this settlement of the wind eaters was not far from the seashore, so as best I could, I made Chief Zitwish comprehend that I could eat the oysters and other shellfish, of which I had noticed vast quantities lying on the white sands of the ocean. When the thing was made thoroughly plain to them that I proposed to satisfy my hunger by devouring such horrid and disgusting creatures as lived between those shells, I was really alarmed at the consternation it caused. Queen Fuyu and Princess Pufa were taken ill and withdrew to their apartments in great haste, while one and all, including the fierce Gowiz, were seized with symptoms of nausea. By degrees, however, they recovered, and orders were issued to half a dozen serving men who, not being gorged, were in good marching condition to set out for the shore and bring a supply of the shellfish to appease my hunger, by which this time had really set its teeth into my vitals. Meanwhile, Bulger and I were conducted to a neat bamboo dwelling with an umbrella-shaped roof, and left to ourselves until the supply of food should arrive. I was too hungry to sleep, and Bulger too was in the same condition, but he was patience itself, as he always is when he knows that his little master is suffering. I threw myself down upon a heap of dried rushes, and my loving companion came and pillowed his head on my arm. After a tedious wait of an hour or so, a great outcry told me that something unusual had happened in the village of the Wind Eaters. It was the arrival of the serving men bringing the supply of oysters. I could hardly restrain myself until Chief Zitwish should summon me to break my long fast. When I reached the chief's quarters, I found a vast crowd of people assembled to see the lump man put solid things down his throat. Chief Zitwish and his court accompanied front seats. As you know by this time, the voice of a wind eater depends upon the condition he is in. If he has just eaten and his body is rounded out like a well-filled balloon, his voice is deep and rumbling. If, on the other hand, he has not taken food for a day or so, his skin hangs in folds and wrinkles on his frame of bones. He speaks with a soft, flute-like tone. As I stepped to the front, followed by Bulger, and took my place beside the heap of oysters, a deafening outcry went up, in which the deep roars of the inflated wind eaters were mingled with the soft flute-like tones of the fasting ones. Not noticing any instrument at hand in which to pry these shells open, I thoughtlessly drew my poignard from its sheath. In an instant, a poignard is a sword. Um, In an instant a terrible panic seized upon the assembled multitude. Queen Fuyu and Princess Pufa fell into a swoon. Chief Zitwish, being in a fasting condition, darted away to his apartments like a phantom. The ministers of state, Lissa, Werwer, and Shaboom, being puffed up to their fullest capacity, struck the ground with their feet and rolled out of the way like huge footballs. Quick as thought, I sheathed my dagger, the sight of whose glittering point had brought about all this consternation. It's a dagger, not a sword. And profiting by the lessons given me at our first meeting by Gowiz and his companions, I began a series of head duckings and walking beam motions of my body, which soon restored confidence in my peaceful intentions and brought my scattered audience back to their seats. Gowiz, who had run the farthest, was now loudest in his boasts that he had not been the least bit frightened. Chief Zitwish resumed his seat with considerable nerve, but I noticed that he kept his eyes fastened on the place where I had hidden my dagger. Although the sight of the toothsome oysters only served to whet my appetite, yet was I now terribly perplexed to know how I should pry the shells open, for the laws of the land of the wind eaters visited death, or the death penalty, upon anyone found with a sharp pointed instrument in his possession. In earliest childhood, the fingernails are kept pared down to the flesh until they lose their power to grow hard, and their place is taken by a piece of tough skin. Teeth. The wind eaters have none, or, more correctly speaking, their teeth do not grow above their gums. Nature seemed to have gradually ceased taking the trouble to supply these people with something for which they had absolutely no use. You must bear in mind that these curious people had not always been satisfied with such thin diet. In ancient times, so Chief Zitwish informed me, their ancestors had been fruit eaters. The fruits, however, failing, they had been forced to have recourse to the gums which flowed from the trees. And as these gradually dried up, they made discovery that the various winds which blew across the island were filled with some invisible germs or particles which had the power of sustaining life. To resume, observing a flint hatchet lying on the ground, I laid hold of it and set to work opening one of the largest oysters. A deep silence settled upon the assemblage. With a skillful twist, I wrenched the upper shell off, and raising the lower one, upon which the fat, luscious creature lay like an lump, um, unmindful of its impending fate, I opened my mouth and gracefully let the dainty morsel slip out of sight. 100 cries of half horror, half wonder, broke like a great chorus from the surrounding crowds of the wind eaters. Again and again this outburst died away, only to break forth once more with redoubled vigor. Cook your house oysters. Just saying, cook your oysters. All right. Many of the onlookers were made so seriously ill by this, to them most extraordinary spectacle, this a most extraordinary spectacle, that they hastily left the place before I was able to take a second mouthful. You may fancy how they felt, about as you would were I to begin gulping down bits of stone and iron. Yeah, he doesn't seem like a rock biter to me. Queen Fuyu clung timorously to her husband's arm, but the Princess Pufa stepped boldly nearer to me, so that she might have a better view of the little man solid all through. Again, I raised one of the largest shells and let its occupant slip noiselessly down my throat, not forgetting each time to loosen the white muscle which held the shells together for Bulger to share the feast. Gradually the qualms of the wind eaters at the sight of a human being swallowing food in lumps gave place to a devouring curiosity on their part to draw nearer and get a better view of my manner of satisfying hunger. I could understand enough to know that many of the wind eaters had serious doubts that I had really swallowed those oysters. To them I was little less than some sort of sleight of hand man or a doer of tricks. The little Princess Pufa mounted upon one of the benches, and the instant the oyster disappeared down my throat, insisted upon opening my mouth to its greatest width, in order that she might take a look for herself and see if the oyster were not hidden away under my tongue or in my cheek somewhere. A sudden scream of terror startled the lookers on as much as it did me. The little princess was carried away in a swoon. It was my teeth. They had frightened the gentle Poofa half to death. For a moment all was confusion. Encouraged by Go Wiz, many of the wind eaters seized their clubs and pressed forward with murderous intent. The reappearance of Princess Poofa, bright and smiling, set everything right again. Now the crowd was seized with an unconquerable curiosity to draw near and take a look for themselves at the terrible thing which had thrown Pufa into a swoon. My jaws soon began to ache from stretching my mouth wide enough to open to give each one of them a glance at my double row of ivory cutters and grinders. And if I do say myself, I had in those days one of the finest sets of teeth that ever cut their way through a slice of Naumburg biscuit or ground up a piece of German roast goose. From now on, these childlike and simple minded people became pretty thoroughly convinced that the little man, thick all through, was a kind and peaceful creature, and in every way perfectly harmless. The children flocked about me, and encouraged by my smiles and head duckings, soon made friends with me. I was glad of this, for I was anxious to make a close study of the wind eaters young and old. You may judge of my surprise when I saw a bevy of these children, animated puffballs that they were, engaged in the to them novel sport of rushing full tilt at me and bouncing off like rubber balls from a board fence. Well, I suppose you are bursting with curiosity to hear something more definite about these strange people. To me, they are not entirely unknown. I had read here and there ancient books of travel by Arabian authors of some such a race, whose bodies were so frail that they were unable to partake of any stronger and heavier food than the sweet gums which flowed from the trees, and whose skins were so transparent that they were called glass bodied. The beatings of their little hearts were plainly visible to the eye of the beholder. I have no doubt that these authors referred to the dwellers of this wonderful island, on which no fruits, berries, or edible roots were to be found, and whose ancestors, as I was informed by Chief Zitwish, did in former ages thus sustain their lives. But I confess that the fact that there were in existence human beings who literally lived upon air, or more correctly speaking, upon the winds laden with some invisible particles of life sustaining matter, was a little more than I had ever dared to dream out, even in the most active workings of my imagination. You may judge then of my delight upon finding myself among these extraordinary people, and upon discovering them to be such true children of nature, mild mannered and peacefully inclined. Well, hello, Rose. Yes, you did finally make it. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to all the quiet people that are joining me too. And we are on page 41. And let's see. Yes. You may judge of my delight. Okay. And then peacefully inclined. And yet I was not long in making a discovery which proved to be quite an important one to me. It was this: I learned that although the truth was as I have stated it, the wind eaters are as a rule a race of peace-loving creatures, gentle in their disposition and averse to wrongdoing. Yet there were exceptions to this general rule. Strange to say, it depended on what wind they fed upon. All the women, for instance, were gentleness itself. They fed upon the soft zephyrs of the south. But the great majority of these people contented themselves with satisfying their hunger by resorting to the strong and wholesome west wind, while a goodly number, from some idea that had a sweeter and more delicate flavor, a sort of heavy, nut like taste, preferred the fitful, irregular east wind. It was, however, not considered wholesome diet by the best physicians of the nation, and they contended that those who made a habit of feeding upon this wind were never as hale and hearty as those who restricted themselves entirely to the nutritious and bracing west wind. Coffee break. Um, Finding it. There we go. A few there were, as in every land. There are those who delight in strong, rich food, who insisted upon feeding on the rugged, gusty northwest wind, claiming that it was the best suited to their wants, and that nature had intended man to partake of a wind powerful and strong bodied in order to fit them for the battle of life. There were even some, a very few be it said to the honor of those mild mannered and peace loving people, who, contrary to the laws of the land and the express commands of Chief Zitwish, welcomed the blowing of the angry, whistling, boisterous north wind, and drank in the dangerous fluid until their better natures were completely changed, and from gentle and timorous and peace loving, they became rough and quarrelsome. To this ilk belonged Captain Go-Wiz. In fact, as I was told by Werwer, Chief Zitwish himself showed signs of fear when he saw Go-Wiz come swaggering into the village, his eyes inflamed, his steps unsteady, his speech indistinct after a heavy meal upon the rude and buffeting wind of the north. While in this condition, Go-Wiz lost the slight control he had over himself, and had, upon one occasion, so far forgotten himself as to breathe out threats and defiance against Chief Zitwish, driving that ruler out of his own apartments by advancing upon him with a bit of flint that he had ground to a dangerously sharp point. Such were the curious people among whom I now found myself sojourning, and on terms of pleasant intimacy with their ruler. A few days after my arrival at the village of the Wind Eaters, I was, unfortunately, the innocent cause of a rather grave accident, which for a while had the effect of making me somewhat unpopular at the court of Chief Zitwish. It all came about this way. I've already told you how quick the children were to discover the solidity of my body, and what delight they took in throwing themselves against me full tilt, in order to have the sport of bouncing off again like so many rubber balls. Now you must keep in mind the fact that even after a hearty meal, a whole dozen of these babies weighed about 1 good pound. I used to encourage them to play about me, in order the better to observe their curious tricks and ways, one of which was to lock arms and legs and thus form a chain of human links, one of which being fastened to a peak of the roof, and the other possibly to some high staff or pole, at times even extending across the street and ending on the roof of the opposite dwelling. Thus festooned, they spent hours swaying to and fro in the cool of the day, often swinging themselves to sleep. And it was not at all unusual to see one of the mothers in search of her child come bustling about, halt, take down one of the line of the living links, unhook her baby, replace the line, and hurry away home. While seated one day on the balcony of one of Chief Zitwish's cottages, a dozen or more of the children set to work to form such a chain, one end of its being fastened to one of my earrings, which, like a good sailor, I took pleasure in wearing at all times, and the other reaching nearly to the ground, passing over the high rail of the balcony. Scrambling, pushing and squirming, uttering the queerest cries, shouts, and squeals, these tiny wind-eaters were half wild with joy, when suddenly one of those nearest me swung against the point of a needle which I had doubtlessly thrust into the lapel of my coat the last time I had been doing some mending, for like a true sailor I was skilled in the use of a needle and thread. I was aroused from my dreamy contemplation of these fantastic beings by a sharp crack-like sound that made the sound of a bursting of like a balloon. Again and again the same sharp noise rang in my ear. A glance was sufficient to explain it all. I could feel my hair bristling up with horror as I saw the living links of the chain snap asunder, one after the other, and disappear into thin air, exploded by coming into contact with the needle point. The force of the explosion of the first of these tiny puffballs of humanity had been sufficient to burst the baby next in line, and so on, to the end of the chain. A dozen of them had gone in less than as many seconds, and not so much as a lock of their hair to carry home to their heartbroken mothers. In a few moments the news of the accident had spread to every quarter of the village. The weeping, shrieking mothers, howling for vengeance, gathered quickly about the dwellings into the interior of which Bulger and I had retreated. And it's time for the break, so I am going to see you in about 5 minutes, and we'll be back.
Looking for breathtaking photography that speaks for itself? Whether it's the raw beauty of nature, the sleek professionalism of corporate imagery, or the infinite wonders of the sky, Donovan Pudoka captures it all. With over 10 years of experience, Donovan's lens doesn't just take pictures, it tells stories. His work is perfect for travel publications, corporate branding, artistic prints, or anyone who appreciates stunning photography. If you need high-quality images that elevate your project, Donovan Pudoka delivers. Have we sparked your interest in Donovan's work? Check it out at matrixminds/Pudoka. My eye promises you, you will not be disappointed.
Welcome to Crystal Cove and Mystic Charms, where magic meets the mundane and the extraordinary becomes everyday. Are you ready to gift yourself with the whispers of ancient power stones? To the feel and hear the echoes of our ancient past? Dive into a world where each pendant tells a story, where rare stones hold secrets known only to the universe itself. At Crystal Cove, our collection isn't just jewelry. It's a gateway to a realm of mysticism and wonder. Let the shimmering opal guide you through twilight dreams, or embrace the fiery energy of the sun with our exquisite amber pendants. Each piece, handcrafted by the hands of a true mystic who understand the language of the earth and the fire of one's heart. At Crystal Cove and Mystic Charms, we believe that every soul deserves to sparkle. Whether you seek solace in the calming embrace of amethyst or wish to dance with the vibrant hues of turquoise, our collection holds the key to unlocking your inner magic if you allow it to be so. Visit us today and discover the pendant that speaks to your soul. Crystal Cove and Mystic Charms, where the beauty of our amazing earthy realm meets the magic of the cosmos.
Hey there, Hunter. Go check out our friends at Colorado Custom Game Calls. They are all about creating a high-quality, custom, unique game calls at an affordable price. They are here for hunters that can't and won't pay upwards of $180 to $200 per game call. They pride themselves on giving their customers the opportunity to not only purchase an affordable and high-quality call, but to customize their game call to their liking. So listen up and go check them out. That's www.coloradocustomgamecalls.com. They got calls for all type of game, and all the game calls can be custom made to your own likeness. That's www.coloradocustomgamecalls.com. Tell them Matthew sent you from the Matrix Minds.
What is up, all my beautiful and gorgeous souls? I am Michelle Espinosa, otherwise known as the Shaman, through the Matrix Mind Media. So tell me, how many times have you wished that you had that special power of prediction? You know, to know what was going to happen before it actually happened and took place. To have some power and control over that situation before things came flying at you out of left field. The thing is, you actually can have that power. You can be aware of what's coming. Tune in to Astrology TV with me for Breaking the Cage every Sunday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Matrix Mind Media. And I will go through the astrology and help put you on the right course and get you back in control of your own life. Love you guys.
This CBD fluid is a whole flower fluid extracted from the cannabis flower. We don't use any heat, butane, or chemicals when we extract, so we get all of the components of the plant. All the CBD, CBG, CBA, all the terpenes, all the flavonoids. This allows our body to absorb at 60 to 90% rather than the average of 6 to 10% absorption you would get with a CBD oil. Because our bodies are made up of mostly water and this is a fluid, it's highly absorbable so that you're getting 500% more nutraceuticals per dose. We also have this available in our CBD spray as well as a muscle rub with all kinds of botanicals. You're going to absolutely love it.
Check it out, Brainiacs. MatrixMinds.live/CBD. CBD I use. Feel free again. Feel alive again.
We're back to Just a Moment. My name is Kristen Harding, and I am reading the book, The Barron Trump Novels and the Last President by Ingersoll Lockwood, because there was a lot of interest in it. So I hope you enjoy this adventure with me because I haven't read this yet. We are reading it together. And the reason I am doing it, just to answer what I saw earlier, is so many people do not have the time to read this book, or if they do hear it on audiobooks or find it on YouTube, it's written in one of those codes where you can only talk like this, and I can't listen to that. I simply cannot listen to a monotone. So that's why I'm doing it. And thank you, Matthew. Hi. And Rose, hi. Or if it is Michelle, hello. When it comes up as the Matrix Minds, it can be a number of people. So thank you, whoever you are. So let's get back to it. We are on page 42. And as I had just finished telling you, they had retreated to the dwelling, and the mothers were understandably upset. So here we go. Now you may believe me when I say that I would not have stood in the least dread of an army of wind eaters when they were fully inflated after a hearty meal. But it so happened that the air had been calm for a day or so, and that many of them were now shrunken to the living skeleton size in which I had first met them. In this condition they were foes not to be despised, for moving as they did with almost lightning rapidity, their mode of fighting was to entangle their enemy in fine nets woven of bamboo fiber and then beat them to death with their clubs. True, these clubs were made of corkwood, and a score of them weighed less than a pound, yet this fact would only make death slower and more painful, for while a few blows might suffice to put one of their kind out of his misery, it would most surely have required a whole day for them to beat the life out of such a solid enemy as I was. Before I had a chance to collect my thoughts, Go Wiz was at the door with his band, their nets coiled to throw over me, while behind the net throwers stood a row of club bearers, anxiously awaiting their turn to begin proceedings. Thought I to myself, this is serious. Beat the life out of me before he returns, for they will know his affection for me. But worse than all was the fact that Go Wiz had just returned from the distant part of the island, whither he and a few of his chums had made a secret journey in order to gorge themselves on the rude and boisterous northwest wind. He was full of swagger and ire. I had never seen him swollen to such a size. His voice sounded like the deep bellowing of some fierce animal. He whirled in his net into the air and called out in thundering tones for his men to follow him. I felt now that the moment had arrived for me to make a desperate effort to save my life and Bulger's too, for with his 4 feet twisted up into one of their nets, he would fall an easy prey to Go Wiz and his band. I felt too that it would be worse than useless to appeal to Go Wiz for mercy, influenced as he was by long and deep draughts of the fierce and raging northwest gale. There he stood, puffing, blowing, blustering, swaggering, as round and round his head he swung the fatal web, which the moment I should attempt to take my back from the wall, he intended to cast over me as a fowler would entrap a bird. Suddenly I bethought myself of the little instrument which had brought me to this dangerous strait. Before drawing it, however, from its hiding place, I determined to play the bully and swagger a little myself. Now the heaviest wind-eater weighs about 6 pounds, and, as you may imagine, my weight, nearly 100 pounds, was a source of great dread to them. They stood in constant fear that I might accidentally tread upon one of the toes of a wind-eater and explode them. Before they would allow me to venture out upon one of their balconies, or to inhabit an upper story of one of their dwellings, they proceeded to strengthen it with the stoutest bamboo poles they could find. So I now began to give the valiant Go Wiz a few gentle reminders of my weight and solidity. Leaping high into the air, I landed upon a bamboo flooring with such a thump that everything creaked and trembled. At first there was a general stampede of Go Wiz's followers, and that blustering leader was the only one left to face Bulger and me. He stood his ground pretty bravely, although I could see that he was half inclined to heed the cries of his men and make his way out of the dwelling before I succeeded in wrecking it. But after a few more of my jumps, seeing that the floorings withstood all of my efforts to break it down, Go Wiz succeeded in rallying his band. Again, and now more furious than ever, they surrounded us, shrieking and howling like mad, their uplifted right hands bearing the dangerous nets with which they hoped to entangle Bulger and me and then dispatch us. Now it was high time for me to fall back on my reserves. I did so. The effect was simply astounding. The needle proved to be one of a kind used for darning, very long and bright and exceedingly sharp-pointed. My dagger point was bad enough. It had thrown them into a wild and panicky fear, but this little instrument, as I brandished it in front of me, threw them into fits of rigid terror. They stood rooted to the ground, their bulging eyes riveted upon the needle-point as if they, one and all, expected it to prick them to death if they stirred even an inch. At last, making a mighty effort, Go Wiz broke away from the spot, uttering a deep and rumbling cry of horror. his men rolling after him in the wildest terror. When they saw the tumultuous manner in which the valiant Gowes and his followers retreated from my presence, the assembled men and women, with their frightful cries, took to their heels as if a legion of demons were pursuing them. In a few moments, Bulger and I stood alone on the battlefield. He had not budged from my side during that time that death had threatened me. "Come," said I, as I stooped and stroked his head. "Come, thou faithful friend and companion. Let us go to Chief Zitwish and lay the matter before him." The chief had just awoke from a noonday nap. He had calmly slept through the whole conflict, and so it was necessary for me to give him a full account of the unfortunate accident which resulted in exploding of an entire string of babies, and Gowiz's attempt to slay me. He listened with great calmness and most patiently too. He then begged to be excused for a few moments, as an attendant had just informed him that a very soft and sweet south wind had begun to blow. He stepped out on to the balcony, and after he had taken about a dozen mouthfuls of the pure, refreshing breeze, returned looking a little plumper, and, like all men after enjoying a meal of favorite food, was still more amiable and kindly in his manner than before. The news that a dozen of the smallest subjects had been so unceremoniously popped out of existence didn't seem to worry him very much. What moved him most of all was the fact which apparently, up to that hour, had never entered into his mind, namely, that a point so fine, so delicate, so deadly, so nearly invisible, could be created by the hand of man. I assured him that it was that very moment hidden in the stuff of my garb, right in front of his eyes. He trembled. I strove to reassure him by explaining to him that I would as soon think of plunging my poignard into my own heart as of turning this almost invisible and yet deadly point against his life. He tried to smile, but it ended in a shudder. "Thinkest thou, little thick man," asked Chief Zitwish with a trembling tongue, "that I may look upon it and not fall into a swoon?" "Oh, most assuredly, great chief," was my reply. "In fact, most light and buoyant Zitwish, I continued, I can rob this dreaded instrument of all of its power to injure thee, and place it in my hand like a harmless bit of wood. Is it thy will that I should thus deliver to thee this dreaded point?" With a slight shiver, Chief Zitwish made answer. "Ay, great and learned little master, I think I can bear the sight of it now. I am indeed very brave, but thou knowest a single prick of that deadly point would instantly end the life of the sturdiest wind-eater." I again assured him that there was really nothing to dread, so long as he followed my directions. So saying, I drew the darning needle from its hiding place. Chief Zitwish closed his eyes at first, but gradually grew bold enough to gaze upon the glittering point. Stooping down, I picked up one of the cork clubs. I better have a sip of coffee, excuse me. I picked up one of the cork clubs and, breaking off a bit of the smaller end, thrust the needlepoint into it. Chief Zitwish watched my movements with a sort of painful curiosity. "There, great chief of the wind-eaters," I exclaimed, "now thou mayest toy with it. Hide it in the rushes of thy bed. It cannot injure thee. It is harmless as a pebble rounded by the supportive, sparkling waters of one of thy mountain brooks. Take it, may serve thee some day in case of a sudden attack upon thy illustrious person. At such a moment, fear not, seize it firmly, draw its dreaded point from its hiding place in this bit of cork. So small is it that it will be invisible in thy hand, and while thine enemy stands before thee in fancied safety, pierce him to death, for thou art ruler, and it is fitting that death should strike him who attempts to rob thy people of their chief. Chief Zitwish took the needle with trembling hand, and hid the bit of cork which held it under the thatch of the roof. Then calling out, he summoned one of his serving men and bade him bring from a neighboring apartment a certain small bamboo chest, from which he drew a string of rare jewels, somewhat of the nature of amber, only 1,000 times more brilliant. With this beautiful gift he dismissed me, issuing orders to his ministers that no harm should be allowed to come to me for the accident which exploded the string of little wind-eaters. Gowiz could with difficulty hide his anger at seeing me once more an honored guest at the court of Chief Zitwish. I did not relax my vigilance in the least, however. Every night I barred the windows with my own hands, and placed Bulger's mat of rushes in front of the door, so that it would be impossible for the wrathful leader to surprise me. Now that the explosion of the babies was quite forgotten, my sojourn among the wind-eaters would have continued to be extremely pleasant, had not a new difficulty arisen to cause me anxiety. The rather thin diet upon which I had been existing since my arrival among these curious people, while it appeased my hunger, robbed me of that plump and well-fed look which I had always had, and I found myself losing flesh at an alarming rate. Chief Zitwish and Queen Fuyu were delighted, for, as they expressed it, the little thick all the way through man was rapidly becoming, in appearance at least, a genuine wind-eater. Bulger too fell away dreadfully. Now and then I surprised him with lustrous eyes. I surprised him with his lustrous eyes fixed upon me, with as much as to say, "Oh, little master, what is the matter with us? We eat, and yet we grow thin. Are we really turning into wind-eaters?" And another bad phase of the matter was that, while my ever-increasing leanness was causing me so much anxiety, it was carrying joy to the heart of Queen Fuyu, who it seems had formed the plan of keeping me for the rest of my life in the service of her lord and master by bestowing upon me the hand of the fair Princess Pufa. Queen Fuyu's explanation of my ever-increasing thinness was that it was the effort of the wonderful atmosphere of their island, that it mattered very little how thick and solid a man might be. If he lived long enough among them, he would gradually lose it and become, if not a genuine wind-eater, at least almost as light and airy a being as they were. And as I learned of these views from others, before hearing them from the Queen's own lips, it was not a surprise at all for me one day to receive a message from the stately Fuyu summoning me to present myself before her. She accorded me a very gracious reception, and Princess Pufa showed great delight at seeing me under her mother's roof. She bounced hither and thither like a toy balloon, now shaking perfume from dried flowers, now holding up strings of curious gems, which I have already mentioned, and making them glisten in front of my face. I amused her by holding her out on the palm of my hand and tossing her up and catching her as though I would a rubber ball. Queen Fuyu looked on in mute satisfaction. When Princess Pufa had grown weary of play, the queen spoke as follows: "O little man, thick all through, I have to say to thee that which will gladden thy heart. The great chief my husband, and I have noticed with joy that day by day thou art growing thinner and thinner. Know then that this is the magical effect of the air that thou breathest. When our forefathers landed on this island, they, like thee, were solid all through. Therefore be not alarmed when, a few months hence, thou findest thyself completely changed. Thou wilt, ere long, lose this heavy load of useless flesh, which thou hast been for so long a time condemned to carry about with thee, and become light and buoyant like us. And, O beloved lump, that thou mayest hasten the change from thy present solid form, and become a graceful and hollow being like one of us, I do, with the chief Zitwish's counsel and consent, accord thee permission to eat with us each day. This very hour shalt thou make thy first meal upon the sweet and wholesome winds of the south. The very moment, little chunk, that thou hast become thin enough to suit the great chief, he will give thee the fair Princess Pufa for thy wife." At these words the princess, who really seemed to be very fond of me, clapped her hands joyfully and bounced between her mother and me like a toy football. "But little man Lump," continued Queen Fuyu, "before we set out to dine on the sweet wind which blows over Banquet Hall, there are two things which the great chief Zitwish said I must be very particular to mention to you. The two conditions upon which he is willing to honor you above all men by bestowing the hand of the beautiful Princess Pufa upon thee." "Name them, gracious queen," I cried, for I was too wise to raise any objection at this point. I knew only too well that a single word from Chief Zitwish would hand me over to the tender mercies of the fierce Go Wiz. "They are," resumed Queen Fuyu, puffing out her cheeks and tapping them playfully with the backs of her thumbs, "they are, little man thick all through, that thou shalt file thy teeth down, even with thy gums, and keep thy nails always pared down to the flesh." "It shall be, gracious queen, as thou desirest," I replied, with several low bendings of my body. "Then," answered the Queen Fuyu gaily, "there remains nothing for thee to do but begin at once to accustom thyself to our food. So let us set out for Banquet Hill without delay, for the sweet south wind is blowing, fresh and strong." I accompanied Queen Fuyu and Princess Pufa to the place indicated. It was a beautiful knoll, from which I could look far away to the southward over a valley enchantingly fair. She and the princess at once began to inhale the soft, sweet air, and encouraged me to do the same. They were delighted with my efforts. In fact, the motherly Fuyu seemed a little bit anxious lest I should overeat myself. After the princess had taken a few deep draughts, I was surprised to see an attendant approach her and place about her throat a necklace of beads strung upon an elastic cord. This was a precaution to prevent the princess from eating too heartily, were she so inclined. Well, as you may imagine, I returned to my apartments from dining with the Queen Fuyu and Princess Pufa on Banquet Hill, a very hungry man. If that were possible, hungrier than I was before, for the pure fresh air and many deep breaths had fairly made me ravenous. And we are at the top of the hour, so I'm just going to mark that page. There we go. And the next time I don't have a guest, we'll continue. So that is all for now, my dear friends. Thank you so much for joining us. Never forget that you are amazing. You are loved. Be well, be safe out there, and I'll see you on the next show. Bye.